Hey, everybody, it's David Nagel. Welcome to another episode of the Successful Mind Podcast. Today, we are here with Scott Mann, who's the author of Nobody's Coming to Save You, a Green Beret's Guide to Getting Shit Done. This is Scott's second appearance. His first one was amazing. And we talked about Operation Pineapple Express the last time, which was just an absolutely incredible feat, getting people out of Afghanistan, which was wonderful. So, Scott, welcome back. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me, David. It's an honor to be here.
How's everything going?
It's great, man. I mean, it's interesting. I was talking to my wife about this morning. After a career in the military and then another decade plus teaching leadership and storytelling and those kinds of things, I find myself just more and more interested in just kind of living that life by design and finding where I'm most relevant and trying to play my position there and just pour myself into other leaders that are making a big impact. And I feel like I've been able to do that the last year or so. And that really has been a good feeling.
Is that what brought you to read to write this book?
I mean, you know this better than anybody. When you write a book, there's always a reason. I believe there's always a reason that we write a book or a play or we do a TED talk. There's always something that's kind of driving us, keeping us up at night, that's pushing us, something that scares us a little bit or maybe a lot. And for me, I've written books on Afghanistan. I've written books on crisis leadership and things like that, but I'd never just written a book that kind of, told my story and more importantly, encapsulated my approach to leadership that I've been gifted by so many amazing humans. And I've been working on this thing for 6 years, and I would throw it away and start over, and finally landed on something that I felt like was worthy of the people who would read it. So this is something that was a long time coming, and I'm just grateful it's out there.
I had, and I think I told you this last time, I had an accident in 1989 where I got sucked through a dam. I was water skiing on the Illinois River, and I got separated from a boat. I got sucked through this dam. I was one of only two people that survived, and it was my Army training that saved me, because it taught me how to think. It taught me how to not panic. And when I read this, the idea that nobody's coming to save you, I remember thinking that back then at that time in that situation. What caused you to come up with this title?
Can we come back to that story, because that's fascinating?
Yeah, sure.
But I guess pretty much what you were alluding to here was, as a young Green Beret, I was taught by some amazing special forces sergeants that these places that you get dropped into and you get positioned in low trust, high stakes arenas, there's nobody coming. It's your teammates to your left and right. It's who you have with you. And it was never meant to be communicated as a negative thing. It was always, usually the sergeant would say that with a big grin on his face. He's like, it's just us. But the reality is that doesn't change the expectation that you still got to get big shit done. Like, it's not an excuse or some kind of doom and gloom thing. I just think today we've become so accustomed to, every time we run into something, we think somebody's going to come bail us out. And it's almost like we've been conditioned to think that the pale rider on the white horse is going to come over the hilltop and save us. And it's just not true. It's just not the way the world works. And I wanted to write a book that starts with that and just establishes that right out of the gate. And then, good, okay, now let's get to work on the things that really allow us to get big stuff done, because that's how the world works anyway.
That title, to me, and very personally to me, was a life-saving message from my drill sergeants when I went through basic training, because I remember going through this part of basic where they were talking to you about war and the horrors of war and all these things that could happen. And they were talking about how if you were to get injured, that there's actually a good chance that you could save yourself if you could not panic and think your way through the crisis that was actually happening.
Yeah.
And when I went through that dam, I came out on the other side. I had broke my back. I peeled the skin off my hands. I was full of puncture wounds from whatever I hit on the other side of the going down the wall. And I went around this island and grabbed onto a branch. And then when I grabbed onto that branch, That's exactly what came to my mind, what the drill sergeants taught me. And I was telling myself, don't panic, think, think. You have to think. And if you're going to save yourself, you have to think. Because I knew if I let go of that branch, the water was rushing so hard. The 2 miles down that river was another dam in Plano, Illinois, or wherever it was. I think it was Plano. Anyway, I started thinking and I thought, my hands are raw. I'm in a tremendous amount of pain. I started unbuckling my life vest and buckling it to the branch itself in case I couldn't hold on. And long story short, they sent up the Ottawa River Rescue. That's where it was, Ottawa. And they found me and they were able to pull me out. And I was only one of two people that survived. The guy that went before me, he went a year before I did, and he was a paraplegic. Everybody else died. And when I was in the emergency room, they said to me, how did you survive this? And I'm thinking to myself, what do you mean? How did I survive this? Like, I have absolutely no idea how I survived it. And they go, well, I said, why are you asking me? They said, because we have people go through this dam every year and get killed, like fishermen, their motor goes out on their boat, they can't get to shore. And I said, why don't you put a big cable across like 300 feet out where the sign says, warning, 300 feet, don't go past this point? And they go, this is what they said to me. Well, we were afraid too much stuff would get hung up on that cable. Now, today, they do have a cable there. And I don't think anybody has gone through it since they put the cable up about 7 years ago. But it was a killer. It was just an absolute killer. But that title saved my life.
Wow. I'm just astounded. I have to ask, flipping in here, me interviewing you, but do you tell that story a good bit?
Yeah, I do. I tell it in live events that I do. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's amazing. I don't think I've ever heard of that, and that's just that's astounding. But I mean, yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, in whether it's that situation or it's just a metaphorical, just a bad spot that you're in, or you're facing a job, you've lost your job, or you're having to look for a job, or something's happened at work, or you've lost a loved one. I just think that honestly, 9 times out of 10, no matter what life throws at us, there are people that are going to come and are going to help, but they're the people that are next to you, that the people that you work with at a local level. It's the people that you build relationships with. Those are the people I've found, David, that are most relevant in a crisis. I don't care what the crisis is. It's the man and woman at your shoulder. It's who you build the relationships with when risk is low, that you pull the lever when the stakes are high. And that's what this book is about how to build those relationships and that social capital before the crisis occurs, before Pineapple Express, so that you can then leverage that social capital to surf the chaos, honestly, because that's what all of us have to do. The question is, who's going to surf it with you?
Yeah, it's after you hear it, and I think for those people that have been through crises before, where they've had to really figure out, what am I going to do? Like, whether I'm helping me or I'm helping somebody else, it seems obvious after that. But it doesn't seem, and that's where I agree with your idea of, like, I think people are programmed that somebody's coming. There's a lot of suggestive material that kids are exposed to with that idea growing up. Yeah. And for the most part, it's completely false. It's not true. You have to be able to change the way that you think in order to be able to move through things. And I'm a firm believer that there's always a way, right? No matter how dim or dark it seems, we've got some amazing stories throughout history where there's always a way if a person won't give up and they'll think within that process in their own mind.
Yeah, I really like that. And, the brain works in metaphor, and, I'll go a step further and say that in the book, it doesn't even necessarily speak to a crisis. It could, there are examples of crisis in the book, but honestly, I think where we are today in our country and in our work environment, in our schools, we are in a period of social crisis where that churn that sucked you into the dam, metaphorically, there's a churn that we're going through in everyday life that is actually the enemy of the big shit that we want to get done. It's not the Democrat or the Republican sitting across from you who we've made the enemy, which is a mistake. The same way that when Green Berets go into a village, it's real easy to think that old elder that's tickling the trigger of his AK-47 eyeballing you while he's drinking his chai is the enemy. He's not. It's the unique, novel set of social conditions over the last 40 years that have created the distance between you and him, and you got to navigate that distance. Well, it's no different here at home. I mean, think about the levels of distraction and disengagement and division and distrust. I call it the churn that's
Yeah.
out there. And I just think that no matter whether you're a stay-at-home dad or a teacher or a Fortune 500 leader, a nonprofit founder, the churn that you're having to deal with is so unprecedented and massive that how you lead through that is really tough. And so that's what I tried to do in this book, was to bring in 30 years of leading through a churn using old school interpersonal skills that is as much science as it is art, and sharing those lessons with folks in the everyday, because the stuff they're dealing with is not every day anymore.
How do you explain or teach someone that the other person is not their enemy?
The way I typically break it down is to understand the first thing that we have to, do you remember the old Sun Tzu saying, know yourself, know the enemy, know yourself, and you'll never lose in 1,000 battles. That's
Yeah.
how I explain it. I mean, in special operations, we have these things called imperatives. And the first special ops imperative is to understand your operational environment. And that means you need to look around at the arena that you're in. You need to look at figure out who the enemy is and figure out who you are and really dig into that. Well, the enemy in this case is the churn. It's not the person across from you in a first world society of abundance. 9 times out of 10, the enemy is not the human across from you. That's the type of approach that brings you into a coercive world all the time, and it doesn't end well. So that's the first thing I say, is get clear on who the enemy is. The enemy is this unique and novel set of social conditions that have conspired us to think with contempt when we talk with someone on LinkedIn or Facebook, or, and that's a dangerous thing. So I want to understand that the enemy is like, it's the conditions around me. Then I want to understand the human operating system myself, and understand that even though it's, even though what I feel feels pretty justified in terms of anger or whatever, I'm a 250,000-year-old Neanderthal. Like, my brain has not changed in all those years. I still go into a primal trance when I get afraid or angry, and my body has a physiological response that the frontal cortex shuts down when I get angry. So even if I'm on LinkedIn and I'm unfriending somebody, it's still a feud over water. It's the same amygdala response that happened 50,000 years ago. And if I don't understand that, and I don't know how to manage my own state and the temperature in the room, then I'm going to get sucked into this churn, and spit out the other side. And that's how I explain it. It's think about it in the last 5 years, David. Think about the level of just emotional temperature that you see people at when they navigate the world, whether it's on the interstate, in traffic, or on social media. I mean, how different is it today than it was, 8 years ago?
Yeah. There is the amount of fear that gets pumped into society with no solution, or the solution being that we have to destroy our brother and sister over it in order to have peace. The amount of fear in the idea that at least in my lifetime, I was born in 66. I don't know that I've ever seen the amount of pushing the idea that people are victims in their own center of being, of what it is that they are, that I've ever seen it as bad as it is today. And I don't know if that's because of social media, agendas. I mean, obviously there's tons of agendas all over the place, but in the work that I do, I see so many people. Like, I'll give you, for instance, I have a program that I take people through, a business program. And one of the very first things that I teach them to do is how to unwind victimized thinking in their mind. And it's people that don't even think of themselves as victims. And when I show them how they're thinking based on the victim so that they can change it, they're actually shocked that they think that there's processes of the way that they're seeing other people and circumstances and situations, even results, where they're looking at it from a victim perspective. And they get stuck in, what do I do now when I actually have this problem? So you call it the churn. I'm just curious about one thing. How much do you think social media plays a role in this churn?
It's a massive amount. It's a massive amount. It's one of the things when I say it's novel, we've never
Yeah.
seen it before. We've never been there's an actual pretty good article by a guy named Jonathan Haidt in the Atlantic. I'm not a big reader of the Atlantic, but this article was pretty good. The title of it is Why the Last 10 Years in America Have Been Uniquely Stupid. And it's significantly focused on the impact that social media has had on us. And I talk about this in the book. It's one of the things in the churn, and we're desensitized to it. We don't even realize it's happening. But if you think about social media, people talk about how on X, it's such a great platform because it's a place for free speech. It's really not. Actually, those platforms were designed to foment in-group, out-group behavior, right? Which is one of the most primal forms of tribal dynamics in the world, is when we get afraid or angry, we revert back into our in groups and out groups. And so what these platforms actually do is they encourage us to revert back to a level of tribal behavior where we only hang out with the people that think like us, believe like us, look like us. And then anything else outside of that in group, we are biologically conditioned to think that is the enemy. And then the social media engineers admit that in an intention-based economy, what holds someone's attention on LinkedIn or keeps them swiping on Facebook or TikTok is sharing fear-based and anger-based content about an outgroup. That will hold attention longer than anything else. And so it's by design. Not only does it group us, but it rewards us for sharing negative content about outgroups. And so this thing's been designed to play on our most primal biological makeup. And most people don't even know that's happening.
Yeah.
So,
No.
that's why, for example, I had two friends of mine who were teachers. They were mentors of mine. They taught with my mom in the little town I grew up in, and they unfriended each other in the last election. And they've known each other literally for like 6 decades. And they unfriended each other. They never spoke again. And one of them has since died of cancer. And, when did unfriend become a verb? And when did we normalize it? On social media platforms, that's where.
Yeah, the days of the funny cat videos are pretty much gone. And the things that they show on there, there's no limit to what they show anymore.
Well, I saw something that was really interesting. They said that humans are really good at innovate. We're brilliant at innovation. We suck at implementation. And I think social media is an example. So is AI. I know that AI will bring lots of innovative opportunities. I truly worry about the implementation of it.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Anything that takes away the ability for a person to think or to follow something as like a god or an authority figure as far as to what you do. I already see people doing it with AI. Like they've given up their autonomy on what they think that they should do, and they're putting it into AI and asking AI what its recommendation is.
I love it that you said that, and I'm not a very popular person in this, but I am resistant to that, and I've had people even in my own leadership academy on school ask me about this, like where do I, because it has all these wonderful opportunities. You can ask it to do this and you can ask it to do that, and my answer is yes, but how much of your own agency in the arena are you surrendering? Because if you think, going back to your victimization comment, right? What is it that's really happening with victimization, and why is it that it leads to such negative outcomes? I believe it's because humans have an innate drive to be autonomous, and when you surrender your agency or your autonomy, then you start to become resentful, and then resentful ultimately gives way to the secondary emotion of anger. And that's when that real primal manifestation of tribal behavior comes out. And but a lot of it starts with victimization. But what is that actually, if not the surrendering of one's own autonomy?
I agree, and it's interesting because your mind is very much like a muscle. I think it even weakens faster if it's put in a state where it doesn't have to. You don't actually have to use it to be able to get through your day every day and problem solve, on your own.
Yes, and I've even found, like, when I will do voice dictation, which I've kind of, maybe I've surrendered too soon to that, but then it'll start to try to finish my sentence for me, and I'm like, no, stop! I want to finish my own sentence. I don't need you to try to anticipate how I'm going to end my sentence. And so I think, look, we are dealing with a level of entanglement that we don't understand. I think we've lost touch with our own human nature. I think
Yeah.
we've lost. I use an iceberg to describe in the book the human operating system. The tip of the iceberg is the modern world where we live, work, and play, and the larger part of the iceberg is the traditional world. Hunters, gatherers, where we hail from over thousands of years, and I believe that is the largest part still of our operating system. Even though we live in this modern world, we are still very much traditional creatures. And I think we've lost touch with that. And we've almost convinced ourselves that that's not still with us. And it is. And the danger in that is that when we think that we are no longer primal and that we no longer have those tendencies, my belief is that they visit them unconsciously. They visit us unconsciously and show up in what I call shadow tribalism. So you see people online, you see people on the interstate behaving in a tribal way, and they don't even know they're doing it. And that
Right.
terrifies me. That terrifies me.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing it more and more. You're like Brad, um, our media guy here, was just telling us a story about some lady who flipped out on an airplane last week when he was, and we're seeing more and more of, like, I I've been flying my whole life. I've never seen anybody wig out on an airplane. And, but it's
Yeah.
happening all the time. They have to
We're
constantly remove people.
we're in a mental health crisis on that. And again, I think it's because we've lost a lot of our social construct. We have forgotten how to connect with one another, or we don't value it. We are living most of our life not in the natural world, but in a represented reality or a
Yeah,
represented world. And so that's removing us from the natural world. I think there's a secondary and tertiary cost to that. And what happens at the end of it? Well, I think that we actually, the irony in it is we become primal once again. And in that, we live in a kind of a fear-based state all the time. And you don't have to look far to see it. You don't have to look far to see it. So again, one of the things I talk about in the book is it's no longer a foregone conclusion. For example, if you get in front of somebody on a real estate deal, or you're pitching an idea to the boss, it's not a foregone conclusion that they are even ready to listen to what you have to say, right? Most people are in such an emotionally charged state, or they're so distracted, that they physiologically can't even hear what you're saying. They're in a sympathetic state of fight, flight, or freeze, or they're right near it. And so how do you actually manage? How do you get a sense of that? How do you manage their emotional temperature using old school interpersonal skills to just bring that temperature down where they're even ready to listen to what you have to say? This is true with our kids too. Like, we can
sure.
sit there and talk at our kids all day long. They physiologically can't hear us. The ears shut down when we go into conflict. They don't work. You don't need them. The body goes into a trance-like state of survival, and the ears stop working. So people aren't listening to each other anyway. So how do you get the other party ready to listen? That's a new step in negotiations and engagement that we had to learn it as Green Berets, because we knew those were the kind of areas that we were going into. I never thought I'd be teaching it in America.
So let me ask you this. How do you tell if somebody's in that fight or flight and they don't have the ability to listen? Is there something that people can learn to understand? Like, if I meet you on the street, we're having a conversation, how would I know?
Well, first of all, the cool thing is, there's a saying that I put into all of my teaching, which is, humans are mostly energy, and so leadership is the management of energy, yours and those around you. And a lot of this comes down to how you measure and manage energy. That comes from Professor James Clausen. But so I use the tool that I encourage people to use is what I call the emotional thermometer. Okay. So if you think about it, our nervous system regulates our behavior at an unconscious level. It always has. It does that for all animals. But, our nervous system, sympathetic and parasympathetic, and they work in tandem. So the sympathetic nervous system is fight, flight, or freeze. It kicks in, the amygdala kicks a warning. And when we face a threat or something that we really need to respond to, our body goes into a trance state, and it really just it responds automatically. So if your kids are burning in a car, or you come up on an accident, or 10,000 years ago, a saber-toothed tiger in the bushes, right? And we fight that tiger, we deal with that tiger as a group, and then we go back to our cave, and we've got some wounded and some dead. Unfortunately, we bury our dead. We tend to our wounded. We build fires, and we cook, and we start to tell stories, and we start to unwind the trauma, and we start to tell stories that allow the people that weren't there to listen as if they lived in that moment, and they have the same experience as if they were with that tiger. And you're going from sympathetic state of fight, flight, or freeze down to parasympathetic of calm and connect, rest and digest. And this is where we actually start to open up and connect to one another from that episodic moment of terror. So when we are trained, we are conditioned to you know it when you see it. You know when someone is in a sympathetic state. You can see it in the way that their face contorts. They show their teeth. You can even see it on social media. And it's a certain feeling that comes when the hair on your neck stands up. For you and me, we also go into that state. So if you start to speak with contempt or moral superiority or rigidity in your speech, that's a trigger that you're going into a sympathetic state. And if you don't pull back on that, then you're going to mirror the person across from you. And that's where we see what's happening today. So I tell people, if you just clock the emotional temperature, yours and those around you, just practice it. Start noticing the emotional temperature. Is it in the red on the thermometer of fight, flight, or freeze? Or is it in the blue of calm and connect, rest and digest? And where is it on that? And the final thing I'll say to that, one of the most important things we can do when we see that, when we note the emotional temperature, is breathing, right? Is get your breath under control and settle into your breath before you engage on anything. Because if you don't, and this includes even typing on your phone, you're going to get sucked into that, just like you did in that dam. That churn will suck you in, and you won't have a fighting chance. You've got to reclaim your own calm and connect parasympathetic state, no matter what. So those are just some initial thoughts on it. But for the most part, if we'll just get our own temperature under control, you can see it on the other party. They wear it like an exterior garment, and you'll know it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with what you're saying about that. You'll know it. It's very interesting. And I actually see more and more people looking for it. And I hear it in conversation where I never heard it before. People being concerned about going out and doing things in public, like with other people in big cities, on airplanes. It's a very interesting situation that we're in. Let me ask you one more question before we wrap up. Where does this go if this doesn't change?
You really want to know?
Yeah, I do. I honestly want to. It's something I've been very concerned about, and I honestly want to know.
This is my read, and this is coming from a guy who spent a lot of his life working in at-risk, under-governed societies where this churn was left to its own devices. Okay, where I think this goes, if we don't start to clock and regulate our emotional temperature and start reconnecting in with one another and putting a premium on social capital, you're going to continue to see an erosion of bottom line and profit from organizations, because they're going to continue to be consumed with in-group and out-group behavior that will basically rob you of your unifying vision. And this will happen to businesses. This will happen to communities, and this will even happen to a nation state. You basically revert back to a form of shadow tribalism where the only trust you have are in the people that are the closest to you, and everybody else is the enemy. And you start behaving that way. And as Sebastian Younger says, you start treating your neighbor with the contempt you would normally use for an enemy. And we start speaking of each other with contempt. That's the first signal right there. And you don't have to look far to see we're on the path for that.
Right.
It usually leads to violence. unmitigated violence, and we go to violence because of our emotional temperature much faster now. That's why you see these beat downs in the airports and in the schools. Our propensity and tolerance of violence in a rule of law society goes, in a tribal society, it's a much higher tolerance. We don't mind it. It's actually a form of civil justice. So you're going to see more of an acceptance of violence. And then ultimately where it goes, if not regulated by responsible leadership and citizenry, is collapse, organizational and societal collapse back into an unfettered environment of tribalism.
That's what I figured. Because it doesn't seem like there's anything. I keep looking for, like, what is going to pull us out of this? Like something's, because I think you're going to get to the place where you're at the point of no return. The people are being raised, you and I weren't raised with an iPhone, so we know what it was like before we had this technology to communicate with, but the kids today don't know that. They have no idea.
No, it's one of the things in the book, and I'll end on this, is in the book, I at the end of the book, I'll show the football a little bit. I address this, and I address what the outcome could very well be. But I also say that, in the early 1900s, America was at a very similar spot, where we thought it was the end of the road for the United States. We had a lot of problems with the economy, the haves and have-nots, political division, infrastructure was falling apart. It almost reads exactly like what it looks like. It was a downswing of social capital and connection. But that was right about the time between 1900 and 1920 that Alcoholics Anonymous was formed, the Rotary Club, the Junior League, and the Future Farmers of America, and NAACP, and it ushered in the longest period of bottom-up social reform and human connection in American history, from 1910 to 1972. And then we started another downswing. I personally believe that we are on the verge of another upswing. I think what you're doing with your movement, I think what I'm doing with mine, Pineapple Express, a lot of these other things that are out there, it could go either way, but we're just as close to an upswing as a downswing. We get to.
I agree. I'm I'm noticing a shift in attitude, especially in our country. I think people have had it with just everything running amok, and they want to move it into a more moral, cohesive direction. So, Scott, where can everybody get your book?
Scottmann.com has got all my stuff on it. Anywhere books are sold. I think we're in Walmart now, even. So you can get
that's great. That's great. We'll put your bio in the drop down so everybody will get that. It was a real pleasure having you. I love talking to you. This is a must read for everybody, this book.
Yeah,
everybody about it.
Thank you, David. And thank you for sharing your story with me. I'd never heard that. I'm fascinated by it. And if anybody wants to go deeper on what they read in Nobody's Coming to Save You on the school platform, SKOOL, we just started a Scott Mann Leadership Academy. It's free. And it's for like-minded members across America, the world really, who see this churn. They want to dive deep on it, like you and I talked about, even deeper than the book. And it's a free community where we're iterating on this and really looking for solutions in the everyday. And it's a ton of content, but most of all, community connection, and they're around this aspect of connection. So I hope people will go there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I wish you all the best, and I'll see you soon.
Thank you so much, David. Take care.
Welcome. Bye now.